In this video, we're going to watch Tucker Carlson bringing up some profoundly important points about issues that are facing men in the modern world. Now, you guys who watch the channel will know that this is a concept that I wrestle with quite a lot. And we're going to be going pretty deep with this one today, guys, so this won't be for the faint of heart. Let's get into it.
You are in Washington much of the time, which is glittering, it's getting richer all the time. The home values are going up all the time in every county around it. But you also go to Western Maine. Was that something that clued you in that maybe?
Yeah, it had a huge effect on my life, on my politics, on the way I see the country. Yeah, I've gone to the same little town my whole life. One of the poorer counties, one of the poorest counties on the East Coast, beautiful place. And I've watched it dissolve. I mean, the culture there, wonderful people. I spend 3 months a year there every year. And you watch the same very familiar pathologies that we wrote a lot about in the 80s and 90s in the inner city, right in the middle of this overwhelmingly conservative, 100% white, rural community. And you start to ask yourself, like, well, why is this happening? Is it because they just, is welfare doing this? Well, I'm not sure that our assistance programs make it better. I think they undermine the family in a lot of ways. But they're not the problem. I mean, they didn't cause this. Actually, they're exacerbating it. They didn't cause it. And what caused it was the collapse of male jobs. And we should have learned this. And it actually has made me reassess a little bit. Not my feelings about watching the family collapse in inner city America. I still feel that's a disaster. It demonstrably has been a disaster. There's really sort of no other way to look at it. But the causes are a little different from what I thought. Like, if men don't have full-time work, families fall apart. If men make less than women, women don't want to marry them. This is not some Handmaid's Tale like talking point that we in the alt-right believe. This is the product of like a century of consistent social science. And by the way, I wish it weren't true. I wish women were very excited to marry overweight, indolent men who played video. I'm serious.
Tucker, what do you?
No, I'm serious. I wish it were enough to sort of be charming at dinner. But it's not, actually. And that's not a choice that men make. It's an instinct that women have.
Guys, if you like this video and if you want to help me reach as many people as possible with this message, then don't hesitate to chuck a like on the video. And also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel and if you're getting value from what I do here and what we do very regularly, then click that big juicy red button. Welcome. Back to the clips.
And it's true over time across population, race, income. So like clearly this is a feature of human nature. So if you're mad about it, kind of not my problem. At some point you have to address people as they are, which is my basic problem with a lot of what happens in Washington. It does not address human nature, which is immutable. It's the one thing that doesn't change. And so if you have a society where on average women make more than men, you will see a very predictable series of events. Women will stop getting married. They will not stop having children, by the way. That's a biological imperative. They will continue to do that, but those children will not have a father in the home over large populations. And that's exactly, and then everything else that happens, which as conservatives we're very familiar with, because we spent a lot of time moralizing about it. I certainly have, a lot of time. And we spent almost no time asking, like, how can we make this better? So if you have a society where the only full-time employers, and this is true in Western Maine, and it's true in much of rural America, are the hospitals and the schools, you have to ask yourself, like, can you have a functioning society, the basis of which is always the nuclear family, always, in such a place? And the answer is no, you can't. So I don't know why we're not spending more time on this. I also don't know why, these stats come in every day, and we have a couple people on our show who are really interested in this stuff, share my interest in it. And so they're constantly sending me this stuff. I just got one today. So there's, of course, the life expectancy numbers, 3 years in a row down. I mean, if that's not a red alert, I'm not sure what is. The suicide numbers are my fixation. I know 4 different people have killed themselves in the last year and a half, all middle-aged men. And I'm going to be 50 in May. If you're roughly my age, ask yourself if you don't know people who've killed themselves recently. You probably do, because the epidemic is that widespread. And by the way, these are affluent people too. Something's going on.
Okay, so this is a very important point that nobody ever really seems to want to talk about, but it deserves so much more oxygen. We hear about this epidemic that is the unusually high rate of male suicide, but we very rarely get into the real reasons as to why. Someone on the internet like me might pop their head up occasionally and say, we need to talk about this more. But we never seem to be able to really zoom in on the stats and the numbers and get to the nucleus of why it's happening. So the numbers bear out the fact that the people most at risk of suicide are middle-aged men, generally in their late 30s, 40s, and 50s. And Tucker's right when he said that there is a big problem with jobless men. But also, there are other major reasons, such as relationship breakdowns, divorces, the loss of family and the access to their children, as well as legal and financial troubles and others. But what does modern culture tell us about this? They say men aren't emotionally intelligent enough. They say you should just hug each other more, cry about your feelings more often. And if you guys just act more like women, then you'll stop killing yourselves so much. And in Australia, there's another epidemic, which is an epidemic of podcasts set up by men to tackle mental health. Very sort of politically correct podcasts where they sit down with each other and they talk about the bad days they've had and they cry on each other's shoulders, and then all of the wokies will say, look at these guys just tackling their mental health. And as much as I'm making fun of it, I do get it. Opening up to your fellow man sometimes is very necessary. But I do think that our cultural conversation about this doesn't even scratch the surface of the problem. And if we are actually serious about addressing these issues and zooming in on the real problems, and if we do want to talk about the aforementioned issues and the things that are really pushing men to the brink, then it becomes a much more difficult conversation. And all of a sudden, you'd have the woke mob down your throat. Because the real issues actually expose the imbalances in the justice system between men and women.
Mr. Manser, you claim you spent 5 years in prison for failing to pay child support for the defendant, Ms. Sears' son, Dylan. Mr. Manser, you are not his father.
She should be convicted of some crime.
No, I should not. I did not.
Mr. Manser, Mr. Manser.
And it goes against the narrative that men are always the oppressors and wield power in every aspect of life. We can't say that. And if we mention the fact that men are lacking passion and purpose and dignity and aren't fulfilling their masculine imperatives to protect and provide and create resources and be the leader of your household and be respected in said household, if you say that, you're a misogynist dinosaur that belongs in the 1920s because men and women are equal.
There's no interest in what that might be. But the statistic that I got today, which I think is, and I don't care how it sounds because I think it's real, out today, 2 hours ago, new study shows that the number of men under 30 who report having no sex at all ever has risen by threefold in 10 years. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I'm a social conservative, just for the record, a pretty strident one actually. My first thought was, well, porn. That was my first thought, which I think is bad. I do. But that's not it. I thought, what society does that remind me of? It reminds me of the Middle East, actually. One of the core problems in the Middle East, and we lay this at the feet of polygamy, but it's deeper than that, is that the economic stratification is so profound that only the rich people get to mate. And you have a huge population of young men who don't have mates. Now, I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable, but it's just true, because again, it's nature, and the farther away you get from nature, the farther off course you are. Nature tells you, and your life experience tells you, you don't want a large population of celibate men. That is a recipe for instability, for chaos, actually. It's a dangerous group to have. You're lucky. No wonder everyone's pushing weed on the population. I'm not joking, because they're afraid. And so what that is a picture of, it's a picture of a society in which the spoils increasingly go to a smaller or shrinking really number of people. And your average young person, that's the poorest segment of our society, is young people, don't have enough to buy a car or a house. They're shackled to student loans from which they cannot escape. And they don't have enough to mate. And one of the reasons is because they're living with their parents. We have a higher percentage of young men living with their parents than in my lifetime by far. That's an economic question. Now, I'm not espousing socialism, obviously, which I abhor and which does not work, at least in the way that it's been administered in every country that I'm aware of. What I'm saying is we're going to get something really radical and destructive and dangerous unless we address these things. That's the only point I made.
So Tucker makes a very profound point here about a generation of celibate men and the dangers of that. And for those of you who watched my interview with Konstantin Kisin and others, you'll know that I've been very uncomfortable with this idea, with the idea that there are so many men stacking up at the bottom and the potential ramifications of that. Here are some stats about the sex decline. The share of men and women between the ages of 18 and 30 reporting having no sex in the past year. 28% of men, 18% of women. The source is the General Social Survey. Now, I don't have any proof for this, but if you think about it logically, women are much more likely to say that they haven't had sex in the last year when really they have. So that 18% is probably a bit lower. And men are much more likely to say they've had sex when they haven't. I would say that the difference there is actually a bit bigger. So young men aren't pair bonding. And guys, I know this from experience, having been very undesirable in my early 20s. I used to be what you would probably refer to as a raging incel. Just playing video games all the time, staying indoors, not really hanging out with that many friends, and recklessly consuming porn. At this time, I was about 30 kilos overweight, and for some reason, guys, I couldn't get any interest from the opposite sex. Somebody riddle me that. So I know this feeling, and I know how destructive it can be for young guys, and often it can lead them to having a very unhealthy disdain for women as a whole. And I also believe it causes the proliferation of political ideologies and subcultures and factionalism, and history shows that lots of young men who are disenfranchised at the bottom, walking around kicking rocks looking for something to do, leads nowhere good, potentially to revolutions. I mean, it'll certainly lead to more crime, and already is, because men under 30 who aren't striving to take responsibility for themselves and potentially have a family and pair bond are way more likely to go off the rails and resort to crime. So I don't think that there should be some massive explosion of sex and everybody should just be throwing it around willy-nilly. I've done that too, guys. Trust me, that one is just as unhealthy. But I would like to see an explosion of young people getting married and pair bonding and creating healthy two-parent households, because this imbalance that we're seeing in the tipping of the scales is not healthy, and it signifies quite a deep cultural sickness that we have. And to be honest, dark times ahead. So guys, maybe go and watch something a little bit more lighthearted after that one. If you guys would like to subscribe to the channel, you can click here. And if you'd like to watch another video, right here. Next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.